Okay, so I decided I would make a vlog about Broadway shows that I've seen in New York, mainly because I was going through my playbill collection and I'm bored and don't want to be doing all of the other things that I should be doing. But I've been meaning to do this for a while. I meant to do this like when I got back from How to Succeed, like from that trip that I took a year ago, and I didn't for some reason. But now I have 3 more to add to that. So I'm going to go through in chronological order basically and talk about all of the shows I've seen on Broadway in New York, because I've been very wrapped up in Broadway culture at the moment. I've been very kind of obsessing over a lot of Broadway stars and looking back over old performances, and I'm trying to find a way to get some bootlegs, which I've been trying to do for years, but it's this really exclusive community where people like secretly swap stuff, and like it's all very illicit, and they don't sell like to you, and they have certain like, you know, elitisms about their trading, and I don't have anything to trade because I don't take Broadway bootlegs, but I have found someone who will actually sell me some, so yes. So I've seen a lot of musicals. I've seen a lot of musicals from school productions to community theatre to stuff done professionally in Australia and in the West End. But this is just going to be about the stuff I've seen on Broadway in New York, summarised by the playbills that will flash up in between each one. And I may do another one in future about the stuff I've seen in the West End, because that's like a lot of Shakespeare and a lot of more British kind of stuff. And in Australia I've seen a really wide range of stuff, including professional productions of Broadway style shows and Sydney Theatre Company versions of shows. Like I saw a version of the Threepenny Opera that they did that was awesome. But for New York City, Broadway it's really, that's where sort of the community really lives. Like I stalk a lot of Broadway and West End people on Twitter, and like the sort of little insular, community or fandom. And there is definitely something about the New York Broadway scene that's just really cool and awesome. Like it's kind of like, I kind of see it as like being on tour. Like I've worked on Warped Tour, and it's kind of like that. It's kind of like everyone's on tour together and living in this sort of bubble inside the real world, except for that they're not going anywhere in this case, that they're just like going to do their shows at night and doing whatever. So yeah, there are stars that go to Broadway and do their big shows, but there is also a really solid Broadway community and that kind of thing where people within it are famous, but they still catch the subway to work, and like it's just really cool. I really enjoy all that, and so like I like seeing all that kind of thing. But musical theatre was like the first art form besides books really that ever meant anything to me. Like before TV or movies or even just music as its own thing, like musical theatre, like stories through song or whatever, it would have been what actually got me to care about music full stop, and it's probably why I'm so obsessed with kind of music that tells a story regardless of what genre it is, like a story narrative style song. But yeah, so as everyone in the world may know, my big obsession, my most beloved musical is Les Mis, which I have never seen on Broadway. I've seen it in the West End, but I haven't seen it running in the United States, which I'm fine with. I like the West End version, and I've liked the million other versions I've seen, so this vlog isn't going to be about Les Mis. I'm sure it will get touched on peripherally, but it's not about Les Mis, just so you know. So Rent was actually the first show I saw on Broadway, and I'm really grateful for that, because it was one of the first shows that ever meant anything to me. The thing about Broadway is, the thing about being a Broadway fan and living somewhere like Australia or anywhere in the world really that's not New York or London, it's really difficult to see shows, you can love a show, you can know the entire like score, all the songs and the plot, but unless there's been a really good movie adaptation of it, it's literally like you're a fan of this thing and you've never sat down and actually seen it. Even if there has been a movie, it's really different, like, sit down and see it, and it's a really bizarre thing. Like, it's a really strange experience to love all aspects of a show and then see it live. I mean, I guess it's a kind of like loving a band and then seeing them live, but it's different because you haven't seen it all, like, because it has the element of like acting it out, and it's just a really strange and awesome thing, and it's why people are so obsessive about getting bootlegs or about getting to see shows, because they know they love this thing, but until they sit down and see it in the theatre, it's like it hasn't really existed for them till that moment. And Rent, for me, was one of the first shows that I knew. Like, I knew the plot and I knew all the songs and I knew the basics of it. And then the movie did come out in like 2006, I think the movie came out, and it was good and it was really satisfying to watch, and I like cried all the way through it. But when I went to New York, in 2008, when I was staying in New York before I was traveling around America and doing Warped Tour, I saw that. I don't know why on that trip I didn't see hundreds of Broadway shows, but it was my first time really spending a lot of time in New York, and I ended up seeing Rent with my friend Tori, who I met on that trip and who is still, is still a friend of mine. And we did the whole like queuing for tickets at the discount ticket booth, which at the time was not yet in Times Square. It was in a different location, and we literally had to line up for like 3 hours. I don't know if that's still even necessary these days. These days I go to like the South Street version of the tickets booth, which is like you just go in and out like that, and I think that they've sort of made the system a bit better, but stuff can sell out, or we were paranoid it would sell out, so we went there and we literally lined up for 3 hours for the ticket booth to open and got tickets, and I think we got like front or second row half price tickets for Rent. And it was in like May or June 2008, and Rent ended up closing in September 2008, and the entire time it's been running, it's been in the same theatre, the Nederlander Theatre, which is where it opened. And I mean, Rent is a really big deal for Broadway because it's a musical about New York City. Like, it's a musical about obviously like gay culture and sort of bohemian culture, alternative culture, and that aspect of life in New York City, like the young artistic community, and you know, nothing like that had existed before that. So the people, you know, in the show, the actors were, you know, kind of the people who the show was about. And it has a, you know, everyone who knows it is pretty emotionally invested in it because of sort of the vision of the writer Jonathan Larson, who died of a freak medical condition. Like, no, it wasn't like a long-term illness, he just died of a heart condition the morning that the show opened on Broadway, like, or off Broadway. The morning the show opened, he dropped dead, and he was very young, and he had this amazing vision, and the show is gorgeous. And yeah, it was the first show, like, when I went to high school, the first extracurricular I joined, like, no question asked, is choir, because I've always done choir since I was in like 5 or 6 years old. So I joined the choir, and the first ensemble number they did was Seasons of Love. So the first song I learnt in my high school choir was Seasons of Love from Rent, and I still love it. And yeah, so since then I've been very invested in Rent. Like, it sort of followed me along. Like, songs come up, you know, in different places. A girl in my class did Take Me or Leave Me as one of her final performances, and for our music exams. And the movie came out, and as I said, I liked it. It was good, but there was no question for me that when I went to New York for that time, it was going to be the show that I saw. Like, I had to see it, and it was really amazing. Like, for a musical, the movie adaptation is really good because it does add, you know, the element of, you know, the cool sort of stuff on location in New York, but and there are movie adaptations of musicals that are not good, and it's not as good as the Rent one is, especially because it's the original Broadway cast as well. So it's nearly every cast member is the original cast member, like Anthony Rapp and Adam Pascal particularly, who play Mark and Roger, are always amazing. Idina Menzel, obviously, even though I hate her character so much. I think Mimi Rosario Dawson is not the Broadway cast, and I know that people don't like her very much, but I always liked her in this anyway. But yeah, so the version I saw was not that cast on Broadway, obviously, because it was like 12 years after the original Broadway show happened. But it was a very strong experience. Like, it was a very satisfying experience, and I'm really glad that it was the first Broadway show that I saw. Like, I bought like all this merchandise. I bought a hoodie, which I still wear. I have a hoodie from that show. This notebook that I'm still annoyed that I lost because it was in a bag that got, the only time I've ever been robbed, this notebook was in the bag. And yeah, I mean, I can't remember the specifics of the performance because it was almost 5 years ago. But I remember how I felt, and the theatre, the Nederlander, I guess that it was known at that time that the show was closing because people were treating it like Godric's Hollow in Harry Potter, or like Oscar Wilde's grave, or like the Libertines up the Bracket Alley. They were writing all over the theatre from, you know, people coming from all over the world to see the show, messages about what the show had meant to them, and I assume because they were going to, it was that the theatre were letting them do it because it was known that when a Broadway show changes, the theatre usually gets a new fit out, not internally but externally. They'll like repaint it, you know, the colour of the, you know, something to do with the show, or they'll have like a wrap, like a poster wrap for the external wall or something like that. And this was just painted green, and people were writing all over it, and it was, I think I was just standing there crying, really. It was like, yeah, it was pretty intense. And because Rent was my introduction to Broadway, the first Broadway show that I really cared about, even though I've seen a lot of musicals before that as a child, this was the first one that I, as I mentioned, like, knew the show before I saw the show, as opposed to as a child I was taken to see a lot of musicals where I was like sat, watched it, and then I knew the show. Rent was one of the first ones, besides Les Mis. No, not besides Les Mis, because I saw Les Mis before I really knew what Les Mis was. So Rent was the first one that I knew the whole show, and then went and saw it. And then, yeah, it was a really big deal for me. So I'm really glad that I got to see it in its initial Broadway run. I mean, the run was a very long run. It was a 12-year run, but it wasn't on a revival. It was the original run. And in New York, in the theatre it originated in, and yeah, I'm just really grateful for it. And you know, it's a shame if you like musical theatre and you didn't get to see it. It reopened at the New World Stages, which is a theatre in New York that has like 6 small theatres in it. Like, they're considered off-Broadway because they seat less than 1,000, I think it is, for off-Broadway. And they're like legit. It's not like it's still considered a Broadway show, but it's not quite the original production, and I know that it made a lot of the New York theatre scene quite sad that there wasn't a production of Rent currently running on Broadway. Like, it seemed wrong that Rent was not currently running in New York, and so now I guess it is running again, unless that show's closed as well. But yeah, see Rent and see it in the States if you can. It's one that, we'll get to this momentarily, but yeah, if you can actually see it in New York as opposed to a, you know, strange revival of it somewhere else, it will definitely be worth the while. So the next Broadway show I saw was in 2011. So we went 2008, and then I went back to New York in 2009, but I didn't see anything there. Saw the Fall Out Boy last show, Madison Square Garden. We were only there for like 3 days. I did not see a Broadway show. 2010 I didn't go to the States. 2011 in the summer went to the States, and we saw The Normal Heart, which was which was running for a limited run. And oh god, I think I got full price tickets for that as well, like $125 as opposed to like rocking up on the day and hoping for a rush ticket or a half price ticket, because yeah, we wanted to see it so badly. Me, Leo, and Mara, who is my friend in New York, who I've been to a lot of shows with now. So yeah, we saw it. It is it's a very intense play about AIDS. Like, it is Rent, also about AIDS, and quite sad, and you know, people die of AIDS. This was hardcore depressing though. The Normal Heart is so distressing. It was the roughest theatre experience I have ever had. I know a lot of people feel very similarly about Angels in America, which I've never seen, and which must be like hell because it's like a 6-hour play. Like, it's like 2 extended acts, and The Normal Heart is just a normal length, but it's about a guy who is basically doing research on, you know, he's a gay rights activist, and he's doing research on AIDS as an actual disease at the time when the government was like denying it, and you know, the 80s or whatever. And holy shit, this play is fucking brutal. It is just so depressing. It had some very big names in it. It had like Jim Parsons was in it, his Broadway debut, as a minor character. Lee Pace was in it, and Ellen Barkin, who's now doing The New Normal, Ryan Murphy's show, but she's an awesome actress. And yeah, basically, my god, it's rough. Yeah, it's so depressing. I've never heard people cry in a theatre like this. There was a bit where Ryan Murphy, this is why I brought him up, has optioned this as a movie, which might be good, I don't know. Apparently it's actually going to be a HBO series, not a movie now. I only just saw that online. So you might get to see it like sooner rather than later, but as a theatre performance, it's really raw and horrible. Like, there was a bit where one of the characters has like a really bad breakdown, like in anger, like throwing stuff around, and it's like just physically, like, being in the same space as opposed to like watching it on a screen is like very intimidating and upsetting. And there's another bit where Lee Pace's character, I cannot even bear to think about it. Like, it is the worst thing I've ever seen in a theatre, like, by far. But basically they're talking, he comes back to Ned, the main character. Ned Weeks is the activist, and Lee Pace is like one of his gay associates. I forget what his character's name is. But he has a boyfriend, and who dies of AIDS, and him and the boyfriend's mother. It's basically the story of like how the hospital treated him or didn't treat him, and how they had to go and retrieve his body from where it had been like tossed out into a dumpster, and put it in the boyfriend's mother's car, and find some like black market person to privately cremate him, because I don't quite remember why, but it was how the system was treating people with AIDS apparently, and it was the whole thing was based on a true story. The guy who wrote the play was basing it on a real activist, I believe, and it was that. But the monologue Lee Pace gave about that, like, was so disgusting and horrible and like depressing. Like, everyone in the theatre was crying, like not like, oh, I have a tear. Everyone was audible. Like, I've never heard an audience sound like that. And the rest of the cast was standing around the sides of the stage, like they kind of sat in chairs around the edge of the stage while I went in the scene. And like Ellen Barkin, like she was like crying, like watching it, and like it must have been like that every single night, and it was so horrible. There was another bit where they were kind of, time was passing, like years were passing, and they were like, the set was like white walls, and they were like projecting stuff and like recording cases of AIDS victims, and like, you know, it showed like, you know, certain year and like certain, you know, names, and then it just flicked through the years or the months of report, and just the way that it grew, like it went from like, you know, whatever, like 12 reported cases or 20 reported cases to like hundreds and then thousands, like so quickly. And it is so hard to process that, like, this time not very long ago, that this was happening so dramatically, like so much damage and so much illness, that it wasn't being acknowledged by like the medical profession or by the government. That, you know, the gay culture obviously was, you know, not acknowledged either, and that people were like denying that this was an actual thing happening, and it was so startling. And yes, Rent is about, you know, AIDS, but this, you know, and so that, you know, it was written in the you know, the 90s, and it was about all of that had happened, but that was like the tail end of, that was kind of like the result of like people, you know, some of the people in it had AIDS because they'd been, you know, on the tail end of the, you know, generation that wasn't aware of it. This was about like the development of it and the discovery, and holy fuck, it was grim. Very good, but grim. It was so painful, and we were just, everyone was a mess. And it's funny because I was gonna see on that trip, I was trying to choose, because I didn't really know about getting discount tickets, because our time was so tight on that trip. I was tossing up between that, The Normal Heart, or How to Succeed, with who Dan Radcliffe was in it at the time, and like I cannot think of like a more opposite show, because yeah, I mean, How to Succeed is a ridiculous show, and I'm about to get to that, like, and it's just, I cannot think of like how much of an opposite it would have been, like a total other end of the spectrum. But yeah, The Normal Heart was intense, and yes, I'm sure that everyone who's interested in that kind of thing will see it if it comes out as the film or the TV show. I think the TV show is meant to have Matt Bomer involved in it. Mark Ruffalo is going to be Ned, the lead character. Jim Parsons is doing the same role that he had in the play, as far as I know. And yeah, prepare for some crippling depression, though again, I don't know if the effect it'll have like watching it through the screen as opposed to like being there physically. But yeah, it was very, 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 very intense. I'm glad I saw it, but very intense. Okay, so to segue on, the next show that I saw, which was 6 months later, was How to Succeed, with Darren in it, of course, not Dan Radcliffe. So I went to New York in mid-2011, and then I went back in January 2012 because Darren was doing How to Succeed in Business, which I have spoken about before, obviously, but How to Succeed is not my favourite show. It's not the show I wish that he would have done as his Broadway debut, but I wanted to see him, and I think that he did it well. How to Succeed is a 60s show. It was written in the 60s, and it's really fucking misogynistic, and it's stupid. Like, the jokes, if it was written now and set then, they'd make it subversive in some way, but it is like the pinnacle of like light entertainment for the upper class of that era. Like, there's nothing to it. There's very little soul to it, and it's just not my favourite show. That being said, I saw it 4.5 times, so I know every fucking word of it now, and there's definitely stuff about it I appreciate. Like, some of the songs are really nice. I mean, it was Frank Loessa, I think that's how you say his name, wrote the music, and he's a great composer. So the music is really awesome. Like, there are awesome musical numbers. Like, Brotherhood of Man, the final number is awesome. Like, I Believe in You is really awesome. But they are... It's just like, I like my Broadway shows to like make me cry or be intensely clever, and this is neither. This production of it, like, there was nothing wrong with it. It's totally entertaining in a way, if you like that kind of entertainment. I thought Darren did a really, really, really good job with it, even though it's not, as I said, it's not the kind of Broadway role I would have given him. It's not even the kind of like vocal role I would have given him, because he has a more modern sounding voice. The way he projects isn't his strongest projection is when it's like a slightly rockier style of, like, where he can like project via like a rock growl, and there's no place for that in this, obviously. If he played Mark in Rent, that he could sing the shit out of that. But yeah, this, he was good. He was cute. Like, he did the character justice. Like, he made the character really interesting in that his character Finch is kind of like playing a game the whole time of, like, you know, how far he can get. So I don't even know what I was playing with. About how far he can get in the world, you know, or in this business without, you know, doing anything proper. We just, you know, playing tricks and stuff. But Darren kind of gave him a sincerity. Like, a Broadway show can be so different, even night to night, you know, or cast member to cast member, because there's no rules about what you do with your face. There's no rules about, I mean, maybe the director says this is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to play it, but for anyone who's seen a Broadway show more than once, or a different version of a Broadway show, your reactions to, like, a cast member's reactions to a line or their delivery of a line can totally change the meaning night to night. Like, they can react, you know, surprised, or like, you know, elusive, or something. The same line can make the character mean something totally different, like, depending on how they deliver it. And Darren did something with his delivery and his reactions, which really made it seem like he was trying to work hard, that he really wanted to succeed, like, that it wasn't just a game to see how much he could get away with. Like, there's a bit at the end, I mean, if you're a fan of his, you've probably seen the bootleg, but there's a bit at the end where basically he's about to lose his job and ruin the entire company because he played a gamble and it failed. Like, he fucked everything up. And he ends up not getting fired because the big, not even the CEO, the chairman of the board is like, he was like, yeah, Darren Finch is like, oh, you know, I guess I'll just go back to doing what I did before I came here. And the CEO, the chairman of the board says, oh, what was that? And Finch goes, well, I was a window washer, sir. And then the man, why can I keep not saying this word? The chairman says, wow, gee whiz, you know, I was a window washer before I started as, you know, this. And he kind of like forgives him and you know, not recognizes him, but like it kind of like causes this camaraderie and causes him not to be fired. And in some versions, apparently, like with Dan's version, it might have differed night to night. He played, but apparently the traditional way that that's played is that is his last big trick. Like that, yes, Finch was a window washer, but that he knew that the chairman was also a window washer. Like, he knew he was never at risk. He knew he was going to be able to forge one of his little like bonds and pull one over. And the way that he had been the whole show, like finding ways to get in with people and stuff like that. And apparently that's the way it's played with other casts. Darren played it like he was being earnest and that he was relieved. Like, he said, oh, I was, you know, the guy says, oh, I was a window washer too. And Darren's Finch, like, bends over, like, being like, oh my God, like kind of like he really thought he was going to get in trouble and earnestly was trying to do the right thing and, you know, had this relief. And apparently this is really not how people, you know, usually play it. And there was a thing circulating around online saying that someone who saw the show overheard a woman, because a lot of people in New York are Broadway fans. They're not, you know, they don't go to a show because it has Darren Criss in it. They go to new shows opening because they follow Broadway. And there was an older lady who said she'd seen all 4 Finches, Dan, like Darren, Dan, Matthew Broderick, who did it in the 90s, and I cannot remember who did the original run, but in the 60s. But yeah, but the original Finch. And she said, I've seen all 4 Finches on Broadway, and that kid was the only person to ever give him any depth. And I was like, seems legit. So yeah, I liked what Darren did with the show, How to Succeed, and because I now know the show so well, I like the music and I listen to it. However, it's not my favourite show objectively. It's a bit pointless and soulless to me, but I guess that he couldn't bear playing a character that was so pointless and soulless, and so kind of turned it into something a bit different. But as I've said, that way that could be played differently night to night. That he could totally change the character's motivation from night to night, which is the really interesting thing about Broadway, and the reason that people get so hung up on getting certain performances of certain shows. Like if you follow a show and you're like, oh my God, it was done this way tonight, or something like that, like that you can miss things, like, or if it's someone's final performance or something like that. Like, it's not the same as being a fan of a movie or a book. Or following a TV show. It's definitely more like the fandom of, like, following a band, of like, oh my God, did you hear they played this tonight and stuff like that. So yeah, of the performances I saw, like, there was one in particular that really stood out, like the way that he played it, and I'm really, really glad I got an audio bootleg of that. Some god on the internet posted it from that. I mean, his final show was really intense as well, but this one was, like, I saw it, and a couple of the times I was like, that was okay. And then this one particular one, which was, I think, the Friday night before it closed on the Sunday, was really, really, really good. And thank God, like, I'm very, very grateful I have an audio bootleg of that. So yay for that, I guess. probs wouldn't see the show without someone I liked in it. It's definitely not a show I've ever followed. My favourite song of his, by the way, of Darren's in the show was the one called The Company Way, which is basically him talking to the guy in the mailroom about like the best way to get along in the company, and it suited his voice the best because it has the same kind of runs in it as Baby It's Cold Outside, which obviously you've heard him sing if you like Glee, but it's the same writer. Frank Loesser wrote that, and he wrote the music for How to Succeed, and it has, I'm not going to sing it to you, or maybe I will, but it's it has little vocal licks that really suit his voice. They're like, I play it the company way, like those kind of vocal little licks. They have the same kind of ones in Baby It's Cold Outside, and he's very good at that, so it was cool that got to show off his voice. But some of the bigger numbers, his voice is not quite old-fashioned enough for it, I don't think. Anyway, yeah, so that was How to Succeed. So when I actually decided that, yeah, I'm going to go to New York to see Darren on Broadway, to see How to Succeed, I kind of took the opportunity to do something I've always wanted to do, which is to go to New York just to see Broadway shows. Like, I saw a bunch of other shows as well. And I saw How to Succeed like four times, technically 4.5 times. I saw half of a show one evening that I got a rush ticket for before I had to meet someone, but because the rush ticket was only $30, I was like, I'm just going to go watch the first act. So 4.5 nights or whatever on Darren How to Succeed, but I actually saw 5 other shows, I think, and so I think I was there for about 10 days or 2 weeks, and I saw 10 Broadway shows, or 10 performances. 4 of them were How to Succeed, and yeah, it was really cool. Like, and I'd do it again. Like, I'd easily now, like, I'm not gonna not go to Broadway shows when I go to New York, but it was really cool to have that be the focal point, like going to get tickets every day and everything like that. And the first, well, I don't think these are in chronological, but the first one I wanted to talk about was actually another play, which was Seminar. So the first one that I want to talk about was actually another play, Seminar. It was a new play, like its first run, and it was just a 1-act play, a fairly short play, and the lead was Alan Rickman. It was basically about a small private writing class for students who were getting taught a weekly seminar, a private seminar in someone's home by this very renowned writer who was played by Alan Rickman. And it was really good. Like, it was really interesting. Again, it's something that you can't really get your hands on because it was the first run of a new play, and it doesn't exist in a physical form anywhere else. But seeing Alan Rickman act on stage was pretty cool. And surprisingly, Jerry O'Connell was in it, and it was his Broadway debut, and he was fucking awesome. He played this really interesting kind of, like, he wasn't necessarily gay, like, it might have been like just like kind of fey kind of hipster character, but just something I would never imagine him playing. Like, there was 2 girls and 2 guys in the class. So there was kind of like bookish, arrogant nerd writer, and really outgoing girl, and then the kind of girl next door, and then that boy has kind of a thing with each of those girls. And then the 4th member was Jerry O'Connell's character, who was he really surprised me. Like, he was really cool. Alan Rickman was brilliant. The writing of the thing was funny. I mean, it was just one of those very dialogue heavy plays where, you know, people say brilliant things at each other for a long time. But it was really cool. Like, the sets were really cool, and I think it kept running with different cast for a while. but I'm really glad that I got to see this version. It was just something I'd never heard of before, but that obviously looked good, and I mean, I like Broadway shows. I will see like a good musical, especially one that I already care about, or a play that I already care about for the content of the play, not because there's a star in it, but I really wanted to see Alan Rickman. I'm not gonna lie, I did. And so that was really, really cool, a very unique experience. But if the play does run anywhere near you, seminar, regardless of the cast, like it is something that now I would go and see again. Like I wish I could get my hands on a copy of the script, because it was very, very clever, and with plays I really like to read scripts and recite them at people. So yeah.